The morning sun had barely touched the horizon when Sarah Mitchell walked through the security checkpoint at Fort. Her badge identified her as an intelligence analyst. Nothing more, nothing less. The guards who saw her every day never suspected that behind those calm brown eyes and that professional smile lay secrets that could shift the balance of power in the world's most dangerous regions. She carried a travel mug of coffee in one hand and a leather briefcase in the other, looking exactly like what everyone believed her to be: a desk worker, a numbers person, someone who lived in the world of computers and classified documents. Sarah had spent the last 6 years building this reputation carefully, brick by brick. She arrived at the same time each morning, left at predictable hours, and maintained friendly but distant relationships with her colleagues. In the cafeteria, people knew her as the quiet woman who always ordered the same salad and sat alone with her laptop. In meetings, she was the one who provided detailed briefings, her presentations crisp and professional, her manner efficient but unremarkable. Nobody asked about her personal life, and she never volunteered information. This was exactly how she wanted it. The office building where she worked was unremarkable from the outside, a standard military structure that could have housed any number of administrative functions. Inside, however, it was a different world. Layers of security, encrypted communications, and personnel with the highest clearances worked on operations that most people would never know existed. Sarah's official title was Senior Intelligence Analyst, Middle East Division. Her actual role was considerably more complex. She settled into her cubicle on the third floor, a space she had occupied for 3 years. The walls were bare except for a calendar and a single photograph of mountains, generic enough to reveal nothing personal. Her computer required 3 passwords and a biometric scan to access. As the screen flickered to life, Sarah began her morning routine, reviewing overnight intelligence reports from field operatives scattered across 7 countries. What her colleagues didn't know was that before becoming an analyst, Sarah had spent 8 years in a very different role. She had been a sniper with the Joint Special Operations Command, one of only a handful of women to ever serve in that capacity. Her military records had been carefully scrubbed and compartmentalized. The official version showed her as having served in logistics and intelligence support roles. The classified version told a different story. One of 96 confirmed kills, 3 silver stars, and operations in places the government still refused to acknowledge American forces had been deployed. Sarah had left active combat operations not because she wanted to, but because JSOC had a different plan for her. They needed someone who could analyze enemy movements, predict attack patterns, and coordinate responses, but someone who also understood fieldcraft from direct experience. They needed someone who could read a tactical situation not from a textbook, but from having lived through dozens of firefights. They needed someone who could remain calm when operations went sideways, because they had survived situations where calm was the only thing keeping them alive. The transition had been difficult. Going from the intensity of combat operations to the fluorescent-lit world of intelligence analysis felt like moving from color to black and white. But Sarah understood the logic. She was 34 years old, and while she remained in peak physical condition, JSOC preferred to rotate snipers out of direct combat before age, and the accumulation of injuries degraded their performance. More importantly, her combination of skills was rare enough that they could serve the mission better in a different capacity. So she became the analyst. That's what the handful of people who knew her real background called her. To everyone else, she was just Sarah from intelligence, the woman who always had the answers but never seemed particularly exciting. She attended the same training seminars as other analysts, participated in the same briefings, and worked the same hours. The difference was that while others were learning theory, Sarah was remembering reality. When they talked about enemy sniper tactics, she was remembering the feeling of lying motionless for 18 hours in a hide site. When they discussed compound assault procedures, she was remembering the smell of cordite and the weight of her rifle. Her current assignment involved tracking a terrorist network operating across the Syria-Iraq border. The group called itself the Eastern Brigade, and intelligence suggested they were planning something significant. Sarah had been analyzing their communication patterns for 3 months, building a picture of their leadership structure and operational methods. The work was painstaking. Hours spent reviewing intercepted messages, drone surveillance footage, and reports from human intelligence sources. It required patience and attention to detail, qualities that her sniper training had honed to perfection. On this particular morning, something in the overnight reports caught her attention. One of the Eastern Brigade's mid-level commanders had been spotted in a location that didn't fit the pattern. Sarah pulled up a map on her screen and began cross-referencing the sighting with other data points. Within 20 minutes, she had identified what looked like a new safe house, previously unknown to American intelligence. She flagged the information and sent it up the chain of command with a recommendation for enhanced surveillance. By lunchtime, she had attended 2 meetings and reviewed 47 pages of intelligence summaries. Her eyes burned from staring at screens, and her neck ached from hours hunched over her keyboard. She took her standard salad to an empty table in the cafeteria and ate while scrolling through her tablet, reviewing more reports. A group of younger analysts sat at a nearby table, talking loudly about their weekend plans. One of them glanced at Sarah and whispered something to his companions that made them laugh. She didn't react. Let them think she was boring. Let them think she had no life outside these walls. It made everything simpler. What they couldn't know was that twice a week, Sarah drove 2 hours to a private shooting range where she maintained her skills. She could still put 5 rounds through the same hole at 1,000 yards. She could still read wind patterns and calculate corrections in her head faster than most people could use a ballistics computer. She could still control her heartbeat and breathing to the point where her body barely moved when she pressed the trigger. These were not skills she wanted to lose, even if she hoped never to need them again. The afternoon brought an unexpected development. Sarah's supervisor, Colonel, appeared at her cubicle with an unusual request. There was a briefing in 30 minutes, and she was needed to present analysis on the Eastern Brigade. This wasn't unusual in itself. Sarah gave briefings regularly. What was unusual was that Colonel seemed tense, and he mentioned that some people from JSOC would be attending. Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest. JSOC didn't sit in on routine briefings. The conference room was on the fifth floor, in a section of the building where security was even. Sarah arrived early and set up her presentation. When the attendees began filtering in, she recognized several faces from her previous life. They gave no indication that they knew her beyond her current role, maintaining the careful separation between her two identities. But their presence confirmed her suspicion. Something significant was happening. The briefing went smoothly. Sarah presented her analysis of the Eastern Brigade's structure, capabilities, and likely objectives. She highlighted the new safe house she had identified that morning and explained how it fit into the group's operational pattern. When she finished, there was a brief silence before the questions began. They were sharp, detailed questions that went beyond normal intelligence gathering. They were the kind of questions asked when someone was planning an operation. After the formal briefing ended, Colonel asked Sarah to remain behind. When everyone else had filed out, two men in civilian clothes introduced themselves. One was from the CIA's Special Activities Center. The other was a JSOC operations planner Sarah recognized but had never officially met. They wanted to know more about the safe house and what she thought the Eastern Brigade was planning. Sarah spent the next hour going deeper into her analysis. She explained that the communication patterns suggested the group was planning a major attack, likely against a soft target with high visibility. The new safe house was significant because it was located near a regional airport that served both civilian and military traffic. She believed they were gathering resources and personnel for something that would attract international attention. The two men listened carefully, occasionally asking questions that revealed they were thinking several steps ahead. When they finally thanked her and left, Sarah felt the familiar weight of operational involvement settling on her shoulders. She had been an analyst long enough to recognize when intelligence was about to become action. Something was being planned, and her work would be part of it. She gathered her materials and returned to her office, her mind already racing through possibilities. The rest of the day passed in a blur of additional research and analysis. Sarah barely noticed when her colleagues left for the evening. She worked until nearly 9 o'clock, building out her understanding of the Eastern Brigade's network. When she finally locked her computer and headed for the parking lot, the base was quiet, just a few security lights illuminating the empty spaces between buildings. Driving home to her apartment 30 minutes away, Sarah let herself think about what might be coming. She had been away from direct operations for 3 years. In that time, she had convinced herself that she was content with her new role, that she had moved beyond the need for the adrenaline and intensity of combat. But sitting in that conference room today, seeing the operational planners at work, she had felt something stir inside her, a sense of purpose and clarity that desk work never quite provided. Her apartment was as anonymous as her office cubicle. Minimal furniture, no personal photographs, nothing that revealed who she really was or where she had been. She heated up leftover pasta and ate while watching the news, though her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about patterns and possibilities, about the Eastern Brigade and what they might be planning. She was thinking about the safe house near the airport and why that location mattered. She was thinking in the way that only someone who had operated in that world could think, not just about what the intelligence said, but about what it meant on the ground. Before bed, she did what she always did. She opened the locked drawer in her bedroom closet and looked at the contents: her old dog tags, a few photographs from her time in JSOC, and a small box containing medals she had earned but could never publicly display. She allowed herself 5 minutes with these memories, a ritual that kept her connected to who she had been. Then she locked the drawer again and went to bed, setting her alarm for another early morning at Fort. She didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. The skills she had maintained, the identity she had hidden, the experiences she had tried to put behind her, all of it was about to become relevant again. The Eastern Brigade was planning something bigger than anyone realized, and when they made their move, the military would need more than just an analyst. They would need someone who could think like them and fight like them. They would need someone who understood both the intelligence and the trigger pull. They would need the analyst to become a sniper again. But that night, Sarah slept peacefully, unaware that in a compound 3,000 miles away, men were making final preparations for an attack that would change everything. She didn't know that in less than a week, her carefully separated worlds would collide. She didn't know that the quiet life she had built was about to shatter, and that the weapon she hadn't fired in combat for 3 years would soon be in her hands again. The enemies she had been tracking from behind a computer screen were about to become very real. And when they did, everyone who thought they knew Sarah Mitchell would discover that the analyst had always been something much more dangerous. They would learn that some skills never fade, that some instincts never dull, and that the woman they had dismissed as unremarkable was actually one of the most lethal operators JSOC had ever produced. But all of that was still days away. For now, Sarah was just another analyst. 3 days after the briefing, Sarah was summoned to Colonel's office. This time, there was no advance notice, just a message on her secure terminal telling her to report immediately. She saved her work, locked her computer, and made her way down the corridor to the corner office where commanded the intelligence division. His secretary waved her through without the usual pleasantries, which told Sarah everything she needed to know about the urgency of whatever was happening. Colonel wasn't alone. The same 2 men from the previous briefing were there, along with a woman Sarah didn't recognize wearing Air Force insignia. They were standing around conference table, studying a large satellite image spread across its surface. When Sarah entered, all conversation stopped, gestured for her to close the door behind her. The satellite image showed the safe house Sarah had identified, along with the surrounding area. Someone had marked it up with notations about entry points, sight lines, and potential obstacles. Sarah's analyst mind immediately began processing the tactical layout, but it was her operator's experience that made her notice the complicated approach routes and limited options for extraction. This wasn't going to be a simple snatch-hand grab. The CIA officer spoke first. His name was, and his voice carried the flat affect of someone who had seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. He explained that signals intelligence had picked up chatter indicating the Eastern Brigade was planning to move a high-value target through that safe house within the next 72 hours. The target was believed to be a bomb maker responsible for attacks that had killed over 200 people, including 17 Americans. This was a chance to eliminate someone who had been on the target list for 3 years. The JSOC planner, whose name Sarah remembered was David Reeves, took over the explanation. They were putting together a small team for a direct action mission. The plan was to hit the safe house during the transfer, capture or kill the bomb maker, and extract before enemy reinforcements could arrive. It was a tight timeline in a complicated environment, which meant they needed every advantage they could get. That's why Sarah was in this meeting. What they needed, Reeves explained, was someone who could provide real-time intelligence support during the operation. Someone who understood both the intelligence picture and the tactical situation on the ground. Someone who could help the team commander make decisions when the situation inevitably went off script. They had reviewed several candidates, but Sarah's combination of intelligence expertise and operational background made her the obvious choice. They wanted her to deploy with the team as an embedded analyst. Sarah listened to all of this with a carefully neutral expression. Inside, her mind was racing through implications and complications. She hadn't been in the field for 3 years. She hadn't jumped from a helicopter or cleared a building or done any of the dozens of things that would be required if this operation got messy. But she also knew that her skills were unique and that this mission could save lives if it succeeded. The bomb maker they were targeting had American blood on his hands, and he was training others to continue his work. She asked the logical questions. What support would be available? What was the intelligence picture on enemy strength in the area? What were the contingencies if the target wasn't there or if they encountered unexpected resistance? The answers were about what she expected. Minimal support due to the political sensitivity of operating in that region, fuzzy intelligence on enemy numbers, and contingencies that basically amounted to fighting their way out if things went bad. The Air Force officer, who introduced herself as Captain Jennifer Torres, was the liaison from the aviation unit that would be providing transport and extraction. She walked Sarah through the flight plan, showing how they would approach at low level to avoid radar detection, drop the team, and maintain a holding pattern at a safe distance until called for extraction. It was standard procedure for this type of operation, which meant it was dangerous but doable if everyone executed properly. Colonel had been quiet during most of the briefing, but now he spoke directly to Sarah. He told her that this was voluntary, that her current assignment was valuable enough that she could decline without any negative consequences. He also told her, in the careful language of someone who knew secrets, that if she did go, she would need to be prepared for more than just providing intelligence support. The team going in was small, and in that kind of environment, everyone needed to be able to contribute to security if necessary. Sarah understood what he was really saying. They knew about her background. They knew what she could do. And they were telling her, without quite saying it directly, that she might need to be a shooter again, not just an analyst. This wasn't just about sitting in an operations center providing information to people in the field. This was about being in the field with all the risks and demands that entailed. She asked for an hour to think about it. Agreed, and Sarah left his office and walked out of the building into the bright Carolina afternoon. She found an empty bench near the parade ground and sat down, watching soldiers in training run through drills in the distance. Her mind was clear and focused, the way it always became when she faced important decisions. The truth was, she had already made her choice. From the moment Reeves had explained the mission, she had known she would go. 3 years behind a desk had been necessary, useful even, but there was a part of her that had been waiting for this. Not because she missed the violence or the danger, but because she missed the clarity of purpose that came with direct action. Intelligence work was important, but it was abstract, always one step removed from the actual impact. This mission would have immediate, concrete results. There was also the matter of the bomb maker himself. Sarah had read the files on him, knew the details of his attacks. She had seen the casualty reports, the photographs of the aftermath, the intelligence assessments of his training camps where he was passing his knowledge to a new generation of killers. If she could help put an end to that, even at personal risk, wasn't that exactly why she had joined the military in the first place? She returned to his office 40 minutes later and told him she was in. The relief on his face was subtle but visible. He had clearly been hoping she would accept, because the alternatives were either going with a less qualified analyst or asking the team to operate without embedded intelligence support. He told her to clear her schedule for the next week and report the following morning for mission planning and preparation. The next 3 days were intense. Sarah met the team she would be deploying with 8 special operations soldiers led by a captain named Mike Torres. They were professionals, experienced operators who had done dozens of missions like this one. When Torres introduced Sarah, he was blunt about her role. She was there to provide intelligence support and help them make smart decisions. She was also qualified as a shooter if necessary, but that wasn't her primary function. The team accepted this without comment, though Sarah could see them sizing her up, making their own assessments of whether she would be a help or a liability. The mission planning was exhaustive. They studied the target building from every angle, memorized the layout of surrounding streets, identified potential fighting positions and escape routes. They wargamed different scenarios. What if the target had bodyguards? What if neighbors got involved? What if enemy reinforcements arrived faster than expected? For each scenario, they developed responses and contingencies. Sarah found herself slipping back into the operational mindset more easily than she had expected. The analytical skills she had developed over the past 3 years enhanced rather than replaced her tactical instincts. She could look at the satellite imagery and see both the intelligence implications and the tactical challenges simultaneously. When the team discussed approach routes, she could contribute observations about enemy patrol patterns that she had gleaned from months of signals intelligence analysis. On the second day of planning, Captain Torres pulled her aside and asked her directly what her operational background was. Sarah gave him the sanitized version, explaining that she had done some field work before moving to analysis, that she was qualified with various weapon systems, and that she understood how to operate in hostile environments. Torres listened carefully, then nodded and said that was good enough for him. He didn't push for details, which Sarah appreciated. In the special operations community, you learn not to ask questions that people might not be authorized to answer. The third day focused on weapons and equipment. Sarah was issued body armor, communications gear, night vision equipment, and a suppressed HK-416 rifle. The rifle felt familiar in her hands despite the 3-year gap. She spent 2 hours at the range, and her performance was solid if not spectacular. Her groupings were tight, her transitions smooth, her reloads automatic. The muscle memory was still there, waiting to be activated. What surprised her was how much she had missed this. Not the violence or the danger, but the simplicity of it. In the intelligence world, everything was complicated, ambiguous, open to interpretation. Here, you either hit the target or you didn't. You either cleared the room safely or you didn't. The objectives were clear, and success or failure was obvious. There was something deeply satisfying about that clarity. Tors seemed satisfied with her range performance. That evening, he gathered the whole team and ran through the mission timeline one more time. They would fly out the next afternoon, landing at a forward operating base near the Iraqi border. They would spend one night there, then launch the mission the following evening under cover of darkness. Total time on target was estimated at 15 minutes. Fast in, grab or kill the bomb maker, fast out. Simple in concept, though everyone knew that nothing was truly simple once bullets started flying. Sarah spent that night in her apartment, going through her pre-mission routine. She checked and rechecked her equipment, even though she had already done it twice at the base. She reviewed the mission plan, committing every detail to memory. She wrote a letter to be delivered in case she didn't come back, something she had done before every mission during her time as an active operator. The letter was sealed and placed with her will in a safe deposit box. She hoped no one would ever need to read it. She didn't sleep much. Her mind kept running through scenarios, possibilities, what-ifs. This was normal. She had never slept well the night before an operation. But there was something else keeping her awake, too. For 3 years, she had been one person. Tomorrow, she would be someone else. The analyst would have to become the operator again, and she wasn't entirely sure how smoothly that transition would go. Morning came, and Sarah reported to the airfield where the team was assembling. They loaded their equipment onto a C-17 transport plane, the ungainly aircraft that would carry them across the Atlantic and halfway around the world. The flight would take almost 20 hours with one refueling stop, plenty of time to think and prepare and second-guess every decision. Sarah found a spot away from the others and strapped in for the long flight. Captain Tors moved through the aircraft, checking on each team member, saying a few words to everyone. When he reached Sarah, he sat down next to her and spoke quietly, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. He told her that she was going to do fine, that her intelligence work had probably saved American lives already, and that this mission would do the same. He said that everyone was nervous before an operation, even veterans with hundreds of missions under their belts. The ones who weren't nervous were the ones you had to worry about. Sarah appreciated the words, even if they didn't entirely calm her nerves. She thanked Tors and settled in for the flight, closing her eyes and trying to rest even though sleep was impossible. Around her, the other team members did the same, some sleeping, some reading, some simply staring at nothing and preparing themselves mentally for what was coming. The flight passed in a strange compression of time. Hours felt like minutes, but minutes sometimes stretched endlessly. Sarah reviewed the intelligence files on her tablet, studying the faces of known Eastern Brigade members, familiarizing herself with their tactics and patterns. She knew this material backward and forward already, but it gave her something to focus on besides her own thoughts. When they finally landed at the forward operating base, it was late afternoon local time. The base was a dusty collection of buildings and tents surrounded by protective barriers and guard towers. It looked exactly like a dozen other FOBs Sarah had been to during her operational years. Functional, austere, and temporary despite having been there for years. They were assigned bunks in a building designated for transient special operations personnel, a space that had probably housed hundreds of teams over the years, all preparing for missions that most people would never know about. That night they had a final briefing. The intelligence picture hadn't changed significantly. The target was still expected at the safe house the following evening. Weather was good, moon phase was favorable for operations, and there were no indications that the Eastern Brigade knew they were being watched. Everything was as ready as it could be. Captain Torres ended the briefing with a simple statement. Tomorrow night, they were going to take a bad person off the battlefield. They were going to do it professionally, efficiently, and safely. And then they were going to come home. When he finished speaking, the team dispersed to make final preparations. Sarah returned to her bunk and organized her equipment one more time, a ritual that was more about mental preparation than practical necessity. She lay awake on the narrow cot, listening to the sounds of the base, distant generators, occasional vehicle movements, the muted conversations of other soldiers going about their business. She thought about the path that had led her here, from her first days in the military to sniper school to JSOC to 3 years behind a desk and now back to the field. She thought about the skills she had learned and maintained, about the mission tomorrow night, about the bomb maker whose life she might end if the situation called for it. Sarah had killed before, 96 times according to her classified records, though the actual number was higher because some kills couldn't be confirmed. She had made peace with that long ago. Every person she had killed had been an enemy combatant, someone actively working to harm American forces or innocent. The helicopter insertion happened at 2200 hours, exactly as planned. Sarah sat in the back of the Black Hawk alongside 4 other team members, the night air rushing through the open doors and carrying with it the smell of dust and aviation fuel. She could see the landscape below through her night vision goggles, the green-tinted world of desert and scattered buildings sliding past as they flew low and fast toward the target area. Captain Torres sat across from her, his face barely visible beneath his helmet and equipment. He caught her eye and gave her a thumbs up. Sarah returned the gesture, checking her rifle one more time even though she had already checked it a dozen times. The familiar weight of the weapon, the feel of the controls, the way the sling sat across her body, everything was coming back to her, muscle memory overriding 3 years of desk work. The helicopter dropped them half a kilometer from the target's safe house, touching down just long enough for the team to jump out before lifting away again into the darkness. Sarah hit the ground running, moving with the others toward a depression in the terrain where they could consolidate and prepare for the approach. Her body armor and equipment felt heavy after years without wearing it regularly, but her legs adjusted quickly to the load. They held position for 3 minutes, letting their eyes and ears adjust to the environment, making sure their insertion hadn't been detected. Sarah could hear her own breathing in her headset, steady and controlled. Around her, the team spread out in a defensive perimeter, each operator covering a sector. Tours consulted a handheld GPS device, confirming their position, then signaled for them to move. The approach to the target took 20 minutes. They moved in a tactical formation, using available cover, constantly scanning for threats. Sarah's position was in the middle of the formation, which was standard for someone whose primary role was support rather than assault. But she kept her weapon up and ready, her finger resting alongside the trigger guard, prepared to engage if necessary. The safe house came into view, a two-story concrete structure with a walled courtyard, typical of the region's architecture. Lights were visible in several windows, and intelligence had detected multiple heat signatures inside earlier in the day. Sarah's job at this point was to monitor radio traffic on a specialized receiver and alert the team if there were any indications that their presence had been detected or if enemy reinforcements were being called. Tours halted the team 30 meters from the building and used hand signals to position each operator for the assault. 2 would breach the front entrance, 2 would secure the courtyard, 2 would provide overwatch from outside the walls, and 2 would remain as a quick reaction force. Sarah was assigned to stay with the QRF, positioned where she could monitor communications and provide intelligence updates without being in the initial assault element. Everything was going according to plan. The assault team moved to their positions, each operator moving with the practiced efficiency of countless similar operations. Tours raised his hand, preparing to give the signal to breach. Sarah watched through her night vision, her pulse elevated but steady, her breathing controlled. This was the moment when training and planning either worked or didn't. Then everything changed. The explosion came from the south side of the compound, a massive blast that lit up the night and sent a pressure wave rolling across the desert. Sarah's training took over instantly. She went flat against the ground, weapon oriented toward the explosion, scanning for immediate threats. Around her, the rest of the team was doing the same, their careful approach now completely compromised. Through her headset, she heard Tor's barking orders, trying to assess what had happened. Sarah's mind was already processing possibilities. The explosion hadn't come from the safe house itself. It had been too far away, somewhere beyond the compound walls. A vehicle-borne improvised explosive device, maybe, or a suicide bomber. Either way, it meant the enemy knew they were here, or at least knew something was happening. The second explosion answered that question. This one was closer, inside the compound courtyard, and it was followed immediately by automatic weapons fire. The Eastern Brigade had been ready for them. The whole thing was a trap. Tours made the decision in seconds. They couldn't extract without casualties, not with enemy fighters emerging from positions all around the compound. The only option was to push through, complete the mission, and fight their way to the extraction point. He gave the order to assault, and the team responded like the professionals they were. Sarah moved with the QRF toward the compound wall. In front of her, she saw one of the assault team members go down, hit by fire from a window on the second floor. The operator next to her returned fire, suppressing the window while another team member dragged the wounded man to cover. Sarah's analyst mind was noting everything: the positions of enemy fire, the number of shooters, the likely routes for enemy reinforcements. But her operator instincts were taking over, her body moving automatically through tactics she had practiced thousands of times. She reached the compound wall and took up a firing position, covering one of the approaches to the building. Through her night vision, she saw movement in a doorway 50 meters away. Enemy fighters were moving to flank the assault team. Sarah made the calculations in a fraction of a second: range, wind, target movement. Then she fired. The first fighter dropped. The second looked around, confused about where the shot had come from. Sarah's second round caught him in the chest. Years of training and experience compressed into those two shots, fired so quickly they sounded almost like one. The enemy fighters fell, and the flank was secured, at least temporarily. Tors appeared beside her, shouting something she could barely hear over the gunfire. She read his lips more than heard the words: "Good shooting." Then he was moving again, coordinating the assault, trying to regain control of a situation that had spiraled into chaos. The team breached the building, disappearing into its interior. Sarah maintained her position, covering the approaches, scanning for more threats. Her communications receiver was picking up enemy radio traffic, frantic voices calling for reinforcements. She relayed this to Tors, who acknowledged and adjusted his timeline. They had minutes at best before this place would be swarming with enemy fighters. Two more Eastern Brigade members appeared from a building across the street. Sarah engaged them both, her rifle firing with mechanical precision. She was back in the zone now, that state of heightened awareness where time seemed to slow down and decisions came automatically. Every sound was distinct, every movement visible, every threat prioritized and engaged. This was what she had been trained for, what her body remembered even after 3 years away. The assault team emerged from the building with a prisoner, the bomb maker, alive and in flex cuffs. One of the team members had been wounded, and another was helping him move. Tors was on the radio calling for extraction, requesting the helicopter come in hot because they were in heavy contact. Sarah provided covering fire as the team moved back toward the extraction point, dropping 3 more enemy fighters who tried to block their path. The run to the extraction point was a running gunfight. Enemy forces were converging from multiple directions, and the team was taking fire from several positions. Sarah found herself operating purely on instinct, moving from cover to cover, firing when targets presented themselves, reloading without conscious thought. Somewhere in her mind, the analyst was still processing information, but the operator had taken full control. They reached the extraction point, a clear area 200 meters from the compound. The helicopter was inbound, still 3 minutes out. 3 minutes might as well have been an eternity. The team formed a defensive perimeter, each operator facing outward, engaging targets as they appeared. Sarah was positioned on the east side, where enemy fire was heaviest. She could see muzzle flashes in the darkness, hear bullets snapping past close enough to feel the displacement of air. One of the enemy shooters was better than the others. Sarah watched his pattern, saw how he was moving between positions, using cover effectively. He was providing leadership to the other fighters, organizing their assault. That made him the priority target. Sarah waited, patient despite the chaos around her, until he moved to a new position. When he did, she took the shot. 800 meters in darkness with incoming fire and no time to set up properly. The kind of shot that separated average snipers from exceptional ones. He dropped, and the enemy assault faltered. Without their leader, the other fighters became disorganized, their fire less coordinated. It was the opening Tors needed. He pushed two operators forward to establish a better defensive line while the helicopter made its approach. The Black Hawk came in fast and low, its door gunners already firing to suppress enemy positions. The team loaded quickly, the wounded first, then the prisoner, then the rest of the operators. Sarah was the last one on, still providing covering fire as she backed toward the helicopter. She felt hands grab her armor and pull her aboard as the aircraft lifted off, bullets sparking off the fuselage as they climbed away from the kill zone. Inside the helicopter, chaos reigned. The medic was working on the wounded operator while others secured the prisoner and performed after-action checks of their equipment. Sarah found herself sitting on the deck, her rifle still in her hands, her body flooded with adrenaline that was slowly beginning to ebb. She looked around at the team, counting faces, making sure everyone was there. They were all accounted for, though two were wounded and everyone looked exhausted. Tors sat down next to her and put his hand on her shoulder. He didn't say anything, just met her eyes and nodded. In that moment, Sarah understood that something had shifted. She wasn't just an analyst anymore, not to this team. She had proven herself under fire, had saved lives with her shooting, had operated as one of them when it mattered most. The careful separation between her two identities had collapsed, and she would never be able to go back to being just the quiet woman from intelligence. The flight back to the FOB took 40 minutes. Sarah sat in silence, processing everything that had happened. They had completed the mission. The bomb maker was in custody, and he would never train another terrorist or build another device. But the cost had been high. Two wounded team members, the element of surprise lost, and a firefight that had nearly resulted in casualties. Success, yes, but the messy, complicated kind that left questions and second-guessing. When they landed, medical personnel were waiting for the wounded operators. The prisoner was transferred to interrogation specialists. The rest of the team moved through the post-mission procedures, equipment checks, debriefing, after-action reports. Sarah participated in all of it, answering questions about what she had observed, providing intelligence about the enemy force composition and tactics. It wasn't until 3 hours later in the privacy of her bunk that Sarah allowed herself to fully process what had happened. She had killed at least 7 people that night, possibly more. Her hands had been steady, her decisions clear, her execution flawless. All the skills she thought she might have lost during 3 years behind a desk had been there when she needed them. But more than that, she had discovered something about herself. She was better at this than she was at being just an analyst. The fieldwork called to something deep in her nature that desk work never had. The question now was what came next. Could she go back to Fort and sit in her cubicle after this? Would she even be allowed to, or would JSOC have other plans for her? And more importantly, did she want to go back? For 3 years, she had convinced herself that she was content with the analyst role, that she had moved beyond the need for direct action. One night had proven that assumption wrong. She didn't sleep that night, despite her exhaustion. Her mind kept replaying the mission, analyzing decisions, reviewing what had worked and what hadn't. The analyst in her was looking for lessons learned, patterns to understand. The operator in her was simply remembering the clarity and purpose of combat, the way everything else fell away and left only the essential tasks of survival and mission completion. Morning brought a summons to the base commander's office. Sarah Colonel's office was sparse and functional, like everything else on the forward operating base. Maps covered one wall, showing the operational area in detail. A secure communications terminal blinked quietly in the corner. When Sarah entered, she found not just but also Captain Torres and 2 other officers she didn't recognize. Their insignia marked them as senior JSOC personnel, the kind who made decisions about operations and personnel at the highest levels. Gestured for Sarah to sit. The mood in the room was serious but not hostile. Torres gave her a brief nod, which she took as a positive sign. One of the JSOC officers, a major with Special Forces tabs and a chest full of ribbons, spoke first. He introduced himself as Major Carson and explained that they had been reviewing the after-action reports from the previous night's mission. What followed was an intensive debriefing unlike any Sarah had experienced as an analyst. They went through the operation minute by minute, asking her to explain her observations, her decisions, and her actions. When they reached the part where she had engaged the enemy fighters, Carson asked her to describe in detail how she had identified targets, made range calculations, and executed the shots. His questions were technical and specific, the kind that only someone with deep operational experience would ask. Sarah answered honestly and completely. She described how her intelligence analysis had helped her recognize the enemy leader's movement pattern, how her sniper training had allowed her to make the long-range shot that broke their assault, how the combination of both skill sets had contributed to the mission's success. She didn't minimize the danger or the difficulty, but she also didn't embellish. The facts spoke for themselves. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. The JSOC officers exchanged glances, some kind of unspoken communication passing between them. Then the second officer, a lieutenant colonel named, leaned forward and asked Sarah a direct question. If they asked her to do this again, to deploy as an embedded operator with intelligence expertise, would she be willing? Sarah didn't answer immediately. She knew this was a pivotal moment, one that would determine the direction of the rest of her career. If she said yes, she would be stepping back into the world of direct operations with all the risks and demands that entailed. If she said no, she would return to Fort and her cubicle and probably never get another opportunity like this. 3 years ago, she had thought she wanted the quiet life. Now she wasn't so sure. She looked at Torres, who remained impassive but whose eyes showed something like encouragement. She thought about the previous night, about the clarity of purpose she had felt, about how her unique combination of skills had made a real difference in a critical situation. Then she looked back at and gave her answer. Yes, she would be willing. The officers nodded and spoke for the first time. She explained that JSOC was developing a new operational concept. They wanted to create small teams that combined traditional special operations capabilities with advanced intelligence analysis. The idea was to put analysts with operational backgrounds directly into the field, embedded with assault teams, able to provide real-time intelligence support and tactical assistance. Sarah would be perfect for this role if she was interested. It was, continued, a voluntary assignment that would come with significant risk. They would be operating in some of the most dangerous environments in the world, going after high-value targets that other units couldn't reach. The intelligence work would be just as important as the shooting, maybe more so. They needed people who could think strategically while operating tactically, who could analyze patterns while bullets were flying. Carson added more details. There would be additional training, advanced tactical courses, intelligence collection techniques, updated weapons qualifications. She would be assigned to a new unit being formed specifically for this mission set. The other team members would be hand-picked operators with similar hybrid skill sets. They would deploy frequently, probably spending more time overseas than at home base. It would be demanding, exhausting, and potentially deadly. Sarah listened to all of this, her mind processing the implications. This was more than just going on occasional missions as she had done the previous night. This was a fundamental change in her role, a commitment to becoming an operator again full-time. It meant leaving behind the relatively safe world of the intelligence division and returning to a life where any mission could be her last. It meant no more anonymous existence in her cubicle at Fort, no more pretending to be just another analyst. But it also meant doing work that mattered in the most direct way possible. It meant using all of her skills, not just the analytical ones. It meant being part of a team going after the worst threats to American forces and innocent civilians. When she thought about it that way, the choice was obvious. This was why she had joined the military in the first place, not to sit behind a desk, but to make a difference where it counted most. She told them she was in. The relief in the room was palpable, though everyone remained professional. Explained that they would start building the new unit immediately. Sarah would return to Fort temporarily to close out her current assignments and prepare for the transition. Then she would report to a classified location for 3 months of intensive training with the rest of the team. After that, they would deploy on a schedule that couldn't be discussed but would be frequent and unpredictable. The meeting ended with handshakes and brief words of congratulations. Torres walked out with Sarah, and once they were away from the headquarters building, he spoke more freely. He told her that he had recommended her for this assignment, that the previous night's operation had confirmed what he had suspected from the moment he met her. She was too good to waste on a desk. He also warned her that the life she was choosing would be hard, harder than anything she had done before, because it would combine the mental stress of intelligence work with the physical danger of combat operations. Sarah thanked him and said she understood. Torres studied her for a moment, then smiled and said he thought she would do fine. He mentioned that he would be part of the new unit as well, commanding one of the teams. Knowing she would be working with him again made Sarah feel more confident about her decision. Torres was a solid officer and a good leader, exactly the kind of person you wanted to have in command when things got dangerous. The return flight to the States happened 2 days later. Sarah spent those 2 days at the FOB, helping with the intelligence exploitation from the captured bomb maker and writing detailed reports on the enemy tactics they had encountered. The bomb maker was providing valuable information under interrogation, including details about other cells and planned attacks. Sarah's analysis helped the interrogators understand the significance of what he was telling them and identify areas where they should push for more information. When she finally boarded the transport plane for home, Sarah carried with her a different sense of identity than she had when she arrived. She was no longer just an analyst who had once been an operator. She was something new, a hybrid role that combined both skill sets in a way that their effectiveness. The analyst would remain part of who she was, but now there was more to the story. The flight home was long and gave Sarah plenty of time to think. She thought about the people she had killed 2 nights ago, examining her conscience to see if she felt guilt or remorse. She didn't. They had been enemy combatants who would have killed her and her team if given the chance. Her actions had been necessary and justified. This wasn't something that troubled her. She had made peace with the moral dimensions of combat long ago. What did occupy her thoughts was the practical reality of what came next. She would need to notify her supervisor at Fort about her reassignment, though the details would remain classified. She would need to settle her affairs, knowing that she would be deploying frequently once training was complete. She would need to prepare herself physically and mentally for the demands of being an operator again, this time with the added complexity of providing intelligence support during missions. When the plane landed at Fort, Sarah collected her gear and made her way to her car in long-term parking. The base looked exactly as it had when she left, but she saw it differently now. She drove to her apartment, unpacked her deployment bag, and took a long shower, washing away the dust and sweat of the mission. Then she opened her laptop and began the process of transitioning from one life to another. The next morning, she reported to Colonel's office and explained that she was being reassigned. She couldn't provide details beyond saying it was a JSOC tasking that would take her out of the intelligence division. Nodded, unsurprised. He told her that he had been contacted by senior leadership and given a heads up. He congratulated her and said that he had always known she was overqualified for a standard analyst position. He wished her well and told her to stay safe. Sarah spent the next 2 weeks closing out her work at Fort. She transferred her ongoing projects to other analysts, completed her final reports, and cleared out her cubicle. Her colleagues threw a small farewell party for her, though they had no idea where she was really going or what she would be doing. She accepted their good wishes and promised to stay in touch, knowing that she probably wouldn't be able to keep that promise once she was operating. On her last day, she took one final look at the cubicle that had been her professional home for 3 years. The bare walls, the empty desk, the chair she had sat in for countless hours analyzing intelligence and writing reports. It had served its purpose, had been an important chapter in her career. But she was ready to close that chapter and move on to something new. The classified location where she reported for training turned out to be in Nevada, a remote facility designed for special operations preparation. When she arrived, she met the other members of her new unit, 8 operators in total, plus support staff. They were all like her, people with unusual combinations of skills who had been selected for this experimental program. Some were former snipers who had transitioned to intelligence work. Others were analysts who had gone through special operations training. All of them shared the same quality. They could think and fight at the same time. The training was brutal. They ran through scenario after scenario, practicing the integration of intelligence analysis with tactical operations. They learned how to set up communications intercept equipment while under fire. They practiced analyzing enemy patterns while conducting surveillance. They trained on weapons systems until they could operate them in their sleep. Every day pushed them to their limits and then demanded more. Sarah thrived in this environment. For the first time since leaving active operations 3 years earlier, she felt like all of her capabilities were being utilized. The intelligence work informed her tactical decisions. The tactical experience enhanced her intelligence analysis. She wasn't trying to be two different people anymore. She was integrating both aspects of her skills into something more effective than either alone. By the end of the 3-month training cycle, the unit had come together as a cohesive team. They trusted each other's abilities and understood each other's strengths. Captain Torres, who commanded Alpha Team, told Sarah that she would be assigned to his element as the primary intelligence operator. She would participate in assaults when needed, but would focus primarily on providing real-time intelligence support and tactical analysis during operations. Their first deployment came in the 4th month. They flew to East Africa to target a terrorist network that had been conducting attacks against civilian populations. The operation lasted 6 weeks and involved 4 separate missions. Sarah participated in all of them, and each one reinforced the value of having an intelligence analyst embedded with the assault team. She could identify key targets during operations, adapt plans based on real-time intelligence, and provide insights that helped the team avoid ambushes and identify opportunities. The deployments continued. Every few months, a new mission in a new location. Sarah went to the Middle East, Central Asia, South America, and back to Africa. Each deployment brought new challenges and new successes. The unit was proving the concept, demonstrating that this hybrid approach to special operations was more effective than traditional methods. They were getting results that other units couldn't achieve. Over the next year, Sarah participated in 23 operations. She had confirmed kills in 11 of them. She provided intelligence that prevented 3 ambushes and identified 2 high-value targets who had been on the target list for years. She was wounded once, a grazing bullet wound to her left arm that the operation that would define Sarah's career came during her 2nd year with the hybrid unit. Intelligence had located the senior leadership of an organization responsible for coordinating terrorist attacks across 3 continents. They were meeting at a compound in Yemen, a rare opportunity to strike at multiple high-value targets simultaneously. The mission brief made it clear this would be the most complex operation the unit had attempted. The target compound was in mountainous terrain, accessible only by a narrow road that would be heavily defended. The leadership meeting was scheduled to last just 6 hours, which meant the window for action was tight. Adding to the complexity, Local militia forces loyal to the terrorist organization were scattered throughout the region, capable of reinforcing the compound within minutes if alerted. This wasn't just a raid. It was going to be a sustained firefight with the odds stacked heavily against the assault team. Sarah spent 3 weeks analyzing intelligence for this mission. She studied satellite imagery until she could navigate the compound blindfolded. She listened to intercepted communications and built profiles of each target. She mapped the locations and response times of every enemy force within 50 kilometers. By the time planning was complete, she knew more about this target than she had known about any other in her career. The mission commander was Tors, now promoted to major. During the final planning session, he laid out a bold strategy. They would insert at night, establish overwatch positions in the mountains surrounding the compound, and wait for the leadership meeting to begin. Once all targets were confirmed inside, they would strike simultaneously from 3 directions, overwhelming the defenders before they could organize resistance. Sarah's role would be unique. She would position herself as a sniper on the high ground, providing both precision fires and real-time intelligence coordination. The plan was ambitious and risky. Success depended on perfect timing, accurate intelligence, and flawless execution. Any one of dozens of variables could turn the mission into a disaster. But the potential payoff was enormous. Taking out this leadership cell would disrupt terrorist operations for months or years, saving countless lives. After reviewing all the factors, JSOC Command authorized the operation. The insertion happened 48 hours before the scheduled leadership meeting. Sarah and 3 other operators hiked into position under cover of darkness, carrying not just weapons and ammunition, but also communications equipment and surveillance gear. Her position was on 800 meters from the compound, a location that provided excellent fields of fire and good concealment. It was also exposed, with no easy escape route if things went wrong. They dug in and prepared their hide site, a process that took most of the night. Sarah set up her rifle, a custom .338 Magnum with advanced optics and a suppressor. She established communications with Tors and the other team elements. She deployed sensors that would detect enemy movement around their position. Then they settled in to wait, knowing they had nearly 2 full days before the mission would kick off. Those 2 days tested every aspect of Sarah's training and experience. The position was uncomfortable, cramped, and offered no protection from the elements. The temperature during the day climbed over 100 degrees. At night, it dropped low enough that she needed her sleeping bag. They couldn't move around or make noise that might compromise their position. They ate cold rations and drank water sparingly because they had to carry everything they needed for the entire operation. But the hardest part was the mental challenge. Sarah had to maintain focus and readiness for 48 hours straight, knowing that when the mission finally began, she would need to perform at her absolute peak. She kept her mind sharp by continuously analyzing the compound below, updating her intelligence picture, identifying patterns in enemy movement. She spotted 3 additional defensive positions that hadn't been visible in satellite imagery. She tracked the routines of the compound guards and identified their shift changes. Every piece of information went into the tactical picture she was building. The leadership meeting began exactly on schedule. Through high-powered optics, Sarah watched as vehicles arrived at the compound and important-looking men emerged. She photographed each face and transmitted the images to intelligence analysts who were standing by to confirm identities. Within 30 minutes, they had positive identification on all 7 primary targets. This was the moment they had been waiting for. Tors gave the order to execute. The assault teams began moving from their staging positions toward the compound. Sarah's role was to provide overwatch, eliminating any threats that emerged and covering the assault team's movements. She settled into her shooting position, controlling her breathing, letting her heart rate slow. The first phase of the mission was about to begin, and everything she had trained for over the past 5 years would be tested. The assault teams reached their attack positions without being detected, a testament to their skill and the intelligence work that had gone into identifying enemy patrol patterns. Tors counted down over the radio. 3, 2, 1, execute. The initial breach was violent and overwhelming. Explosive charges blew holes in the compound walls. Assault teams poured through, engaging defenders before they could react. Sarah watched through her scope, tracking the chaos below, looking for targets that threatened the assault teams. She identified a defender on a rooftop preparing to fire a rocket-propelled grenade at one of the entry teams. Her first shot of the engagement dropped him before he could fire. The compound erupted into a full battle. Sarah could hear the intensity of the firefight even from 800 meters away. Through her scope, she tracked targets, taking shots when she had clear fields of fire. A gunman appeared in a second-story window. She fired. He fell. 2 fighters ran across an open courtyard toward a fighting position. She fired twice. Both dropped. Her shooting was mechanical, precise, the result of thousands of hours of practice compressed into seconds of action. But she was doing more than just shooting. Her radio was alive with traffic from the assault teams, requests for information, questions about enemy positions. Sarah split her attention between her rifle scope and her surveillance equipment, providing real-time intelligence while engaging targets. When Tors asked about enemy reinforcements, she checked her sensors and reported that 2 vehicles were approaching from the east, 3 minutes out. When another team leader needed to know if a building was clear, she confirmed that thermal imaging showed no heat signatures inside. The assault teams secured the main building and confirmed that all 7 targets were dead or captured. But the mission was far from over. Sarah's warning about incoming vehicles had been accurate. Enemy reinforcements were arriving faster than expected. Within 10 minutes of the initial assault, the compound was surrounded by militia forces, and the assault teams were pinned down under heavy fire. Tors made the call that Sarah had been dreading. They couldn't extract the way they had come in. The enemy had cut off their planned withdrawal route. The only option was to fight through to an alternate extraction point 2 kilometers away. That meant moving the entire team, including wounded and prisoners, through enemy-held territory while under fire. It was going to be a running battle all the way to the pickup zone. Sarah's role suddenly became even more critical. From her overwatch position, she could see the route the assault teams would need to take. She could see the enemy positions that would threaten them. She began working the problem, identifying which targets she needed to engage to create a path for the teams to move through. This was exactly the kind of situation her hybrid training had prepared her for, combining tactical shooting with strategic thinking, operating both as a sniper and as an intelligence coordinator. The breakout began. Sarah fired continuously, engaging any enemy position that threatened the withdrawal. She was no longer counting shots or kills. Her world had narrowed to the view through her scope, the feel of the trigger, the recoil, the immediate assessment of effect, and the shift to the next target. Load, aim, fire. Load, aim, fire. The rhythm was automatic, her body executing actions that her mind had trained into muscle memory. She guided tours through areas where enemy presence was lighter. She warned teams away from ambush positions she could see forming. When one team got pinned down by heavy machine gun fire, she identified the gun position and put 3 rounds into it, silencing the weapon and allowing the team to move. She was operating at the absolute limit of her capabilities, maintaining sustained precision fire while simultaneously processing tactical information and providing guidance to multiple teams. 20 minutes into the withdrawal, Sarah's position was finally compromised. Enemy fighters had spotted her muzzle flashes and were moving up toward her position. She alerted the other operators in her hide sight, and they prepared to defend themselves. But she couldn't abandon her overwatch role. The assault teams still needed her support. She continued firing at targets in the valley below, while the other operators in her position engaged the enemies approaching from behind. It was an impossible situation, trying to fight in 2 directions at once with limited ammunition and no reinforcements. Sarah's training had covered scenarios like this, the kind where the only options were bad or worse. She chose to keep supporting the assault teams for as long as possible, trusting that her teammates could hold off the flanking attack. The 3 operators defending their position fought with desperate intensity. Sarah could hear the firefight behind her even as she continued engaging targets in front. She was running low on ammunition, down to her last 3 magazines. Every shot had to count now. She picked her targets carefully, focusing on the threats that posed the greatest danger to the withdrawing teams. Tor's voice came over the radio. The assault teams had reached the extraction point and helicopters were inbound. But they couldn't leave Sarah's team behind. She told Tors to get everyone else out first, that her team would hold as long as they could and extract on the second wave of helicopters. Tors argued, but Sarah overrode him. She was the senior person in the overwatch position, and it was her call to make. The enemy fighters reached her position. Sarah dropped her rifle and transitioned to her sidearm, engaging targets at close range. The hide sight became a close-quarters battle, the kind where training and instinct meant the difference between life and death. One of her teammates went down, wounded but still fighting. Another was out of ammunition and fighting with his knife. Sarah fired her pistol until it was empty, then used her rifle as a club, every bit of her combat training focused on survival. And then the cavalry arrived. An Apache helicopter gunship had been diverted to their position, and it came in firing, its chain gun tearing into the enemy fighters surrounding the hide site. The sudden firepower turned the tide of the fight. The surviving enemy fighters broke and ran. Sarah and her 2 remaining teammates, one of them seriously wounded, held their position until extraction helicopters arrived 5 minutes later. The ride back to base was a blur. Sarah was running on pure adrenaline, her body and mind pushed beyond normal limits. The wounded operator received treatment from the helicopter medic. Sarah sat in silence, her rifle across her lap, her hands shaking slightly as the adrenaline began to wear off. She had fired over 200 rounds during the engagement, most of them precisely aimed shots at ranges from 50 to 900 meters. She had no idea how many enemies she had killed or wounded. All she knew was that the mission had succeeded and her team had survived. The after-action review took 3 days. Every aspect of the mission was analyzed in exhaustive detail. Sarah's performance was highlighted as exceptional. Her combination of precision shooting and tactical intelligence coordination had been critical to the mission's success. The captured targets were providing valuable intelligence that was already being used to disrupt terrorist operations. The operation was deemed a complete success despite the difficulties during extraction. Major Torres visited Sarah in her quarters on the 4th day after the mission. He sat down across from her and studied her carefully before speaking. He told her that he had recommended her for a decoration, though he couldn't say which one because it would be classified. He said that what she had done during that mission, maintaining overwatch while coordinating intelligence for multiple teams, continuing to fight even when her own position was overrun, was the finest piece of operational work he had seen in 20 years of special operations. But he also asked her a question. How much longer could she keep doing this? Sarah understood what he was really asking. This life took a toll, physical, mental, emotional. Every mission carried the risk of death or injury. Every deployment meant months away from anything resembling a normal life. The human body and mind could only sustain this level of stress for so long before something broke. Torres had seen it happen to countless operators over his career, and he was concerned it might happen to Sarah. She gave him an honest answer. She didn't know how much longer she could keep operating at this level. The Yemen mission had pushed her to her absolute limits. She wasn't sure she had anything left to give beyond that, but she also wasn't ready to quit. There was still work to be done, still missions that required her unique skill set. As long as she could contribute, as long as she could make a difference, she wanted to stay in the fight. Torres accepted this and told her to take some leave, to get away from base and decompress. Sarah agreed and spent the next 3 weeks at a remote cabin in Montana, hiking and fishing and trying to remember what it felt like to be off the clock. The quiet was difficult at first. Her mind kept going back to operations, reviewing decisions, analyzing outcomes. But gradually, she learned to be still, to exist in the moment without constantly planning the next move. When she returned to base, there was a new mission waiting, and another after that. Sarah continued to operate mission after mission, deployment after deployment. Her reputation grew within the special operations community. They called her the Analyst, but now it was a title of respect rather than just a description. She was the operator who could think and fight simultaneously, who could turn intelligence into direct action, who could be counted on when missions went sideways. 3 years after the Yemen operation, Sarah finally made the decision to transition out of active operations. It wasn't because of any single event or failure. It was simply the accumulated weight of dozens of missions, hundreds of firefights, and thousands of decisions where the wrong choice could have meant death for her or her teammates. She was 39 years old, had been in special operations for over a decade, and had earned the right to step back. JSOC asked her to stay on in a training role, teaching the next generation of hybrid operators. She accepted and found that she was good at it. She could convey not just the technical skills, but the mindset required to succeed in that demanding role. Her students respected her because she had done everything she was teaching them to do, had survived situations they could barely imagine, had proven herself in ways that left no room for doubt. Looking back on her career, Sarah felt a sense of completion that many operators never achieved. She had served at the highest levels of special operations. She had made real differences in real conflicts. She had developed new capabilities that others would build on. She had survived when many hadn't. The journey from that quiet analyst's cubicle at Fort to the training center where she now taught had been improbable and dangerous and absolutely necessary. People who met her now, who knew only that she was an instructor at a classified training facility, had no idea what she had really done. They didn't know about the 96 confirmed kills from her sniper days, or the dozens more from her time with the hybrid unit. They didn't know about the missions that had gone perfectly or the ones that had almost failed. They didn't know about the nights she had spent on cold mountains watching enemy compounds, or the firefights where survival had been measured in fractions of seconds. She preferred it that way. Sarah had never sought recognition or fame. She had simply wanted to serve, to contribute, to make the world a little safer through her actions. The fact that most people would never know what she had done was fine with her. The people who mattered knew. Her teammates knew. The commanders who had trusted her with impossible missions knew. That was enough. Sometimes, late at night in her small house near the training facility, Sarah would think about the journey, about the young woman who had joined the military with vague notions of service and adventure, about the sniper she had become, learning to kill with precision and purpose, about the analyst who had tried to find meaning in data and reports, and about the hybrid operator who had combined all these identities into something unique and valuable. She had been called the Analyst as a way to hide what she really was. In the end, the title had become something more, a recognition that the best operators weren't just shooters or thinkers, but both. That intelligence without action was incomplete, and action without intelligence was dangerous. That the future of special operations belonged to people who could bridge both worlds. Sarah Mitchell had built that bridge with her career, sometimes painfully, always purposefully. She had shown that a woman could operate at the highest levels of special operations, could think strategically while fighting tactically, could earn the respect of the hardest men in the hardest profession. She had taken the limitations others tried to impose and turned them into advantages. She had made every mission, every firefight, every impossible situation into an opportunity to prove that different approaches could be just as effective as traditional ones. Her legacy would be measured not just in her own accomplishments, but in the operators she trained, the tactics she developed, and the proof she provided that special operations could evolve beyond traditional models. Years after she retired from active operations, the hybrid intelligence operator concept she had helped pioneer would become standard in elite units around the world. Future generations would combine analytical thinking with tactical action without questioning whether such integration was possible, because Sarah and others like her had already proven it worked. The Analyst. The name had started as camouflage, become a description, and ended as a legend. And the woman behind the title had earned every bit of respect it carried, one mission, one shot, one decision at a time. She had been what the military needed when it needed her, had adapted when adaptation was required, and had proven that excellence knew no boundaries when skill, determination, and courage came together. Sarah's story was one of transformation, from analyst to operator, from desk to battlefield, from invisible to indispensable. It was a reminder that the most dangerous people are often the ones nobody sees coming, that quiet competence can conceal extraordinary capability, and that when the situation demands it, the right person with the right skills can change everything. They had called her the Analyst until the enemy attacked. Then they discovered she was something far more formidable, a warrior who could think, an analyst who could fight, and an operator who represented the evolution of special operations. Warfare itself required stitches, but didn't take her out of action for long. She saw team members killed and others wounded seriously enough to end their careers. She experienced the full spectrum of special operations work, the successes, the failures, the luck good and bad, dressed in clean fatigues, and made her way across the fob, wondering what this meeting would bring. The base commander was a full colonel named, a career officer with a reputation for direct communication and no patience for bureaucracy. Civilians. She felt no guilt about those deaths, only a quiet satisfaction that she had been able to protect others by taking those shots, arriving at work with her coffee and briefcase, sitting in her anonymous cubicle, doing work that seemed ordinary but was anything but. The storm was gathering, but she couldn't see it yet. None of them could.